So today I wanted to talk about something interesting: population density, aging population, decline in birth rates, developed nations, kind of how population demographics and movement works. So right now we're having a decline in birth rates, especially in developed countries, but all across the globe. So I think the UN's projecting, and we had kind of like this almost hockey stick like growth, right? And we're sort of at the inflection point, kind of, let's say like right around here. I don't have the exact chart. You can find it on world data or like the UN. But this is population, and this is time, and this is population. So we went through like a rapid period of growth. And I think the current projections are around like, I don't remember the exact dates, but let's say like 2050. 2050 is when we reach the peak. 2050 to 2100 is when we'll reach the peak. And then there's all sorts of ways it can go. I mean, it can just flatline, it can oscillate like that, it can go down. I mean, there's all sorts of ways we can try to model it. But the reason I wanted to talk about the decline in birth rates is how it relates to population density and population movement. So if we look at cities, for example, as countries get more industrialized, countries also get, or cities also have higher densities. And that's because people start moving to the cities, right? Because that's where all the job opportunities and that's where all the technology is. I think that's called there's a specific economic term for it, but uh, I'll just call it more people equals more more opportunities, more technology, more infrastructure, more infra, and more. It's just there's more things there. So that's why, I mean, it makes sense why people move to cities. The bigger cities get, the better it is to move there because there's more opportunities, there's more things to do, there's more things to experience, there's more people. However, the part about cities that people don't really talk about is moving to cities decrease birth rates. And there's a pretty easy intuitive understanding of why. As density in cities, as cities get bigger and as density gets bigger, birth rates go down, and that's because of specialization. It's because specialization increases. So, for example, if you're working on a farm, you can start working when you're like 5 years old. Obviously, you're not going to be strong, right? You're going to get much stronger when you get older, but you can still help out with on the farm. But if you work like, let's say, at a nuclear plant, right, nuclear power plant, you're not gonna you're not gonna give a job. You're not gonna let a 5-year-old help around in a nuclear power plant, right, for good reason. And that's because of specialization, right? It requires more education to do the work. Increasing specialization allows us to be more efficient, right? Specialization increases efficiency, and that's a very easy thing to understand because specialization really means what it really means is less complexity, right? You're becoming more niche. You're taking your focus and narrowing down what you're actually focusing on, right? So it's a smaller target that you're focusing on. Smaller systems are easier to manage than larger systems, right? So the smaller systems are more efficient. Think of like a toy with 20 parts versus a toy with like 1,000 parts. Having like a more complex system means that you have to have more knowledge on how that system works, right? So it's less efficient to basically you want to keep things simple, right? Keep it simple, stupid. KIS. Keep it simple, stupid. The larger the systems are, the less efficient they become because they're more complex. Now, there's going to be more friction. You can think of it like physics, right? Physics where, so if you have like gears, right? Gears, the more parts you have, the more friction you have, right? So for example, if maybe 2 gears has like a 95% efficiency, right? But maybe like, oh, these kind of look like suns. Maybe like a 5 gear system, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, might have like an efficiency of, let's say, 80%, right? Because of friction. It's all about friction. So the bigger the system is, the less efficient it becomes, right? In any system, right? Social, economic, financial, ecological. And this is why we want to keep things simple, right? Which is why we do specialization, right? Specialization allows us to make big systems into smaller, right? It's all about chunking. We chunk into smaller systems so that it becomes more efficient. That's really the whole mathematics, the physics behind specialization. It's chunking and making it into smaller systems. Okay, so how does this relate to cities, right? People have less kids as society becomes more complex and as cities get denser because we have increased specialization, right? As you try to maintain bigger and bigger systems, right? Bigger systems require more specialization, right? Because you need more infrastructure to keep it up. For example, if you have just one house, right? If you have a house, all you need to really think about is, water, food, waste, water, food, waste, maybe temperature controls, maintenance, like fixing the roof and stuff, and food. That's pretty much all you need to think about: water, food, waste, temperature, maintenance, food, plus a little bit of other things. Maybe electricity, right now. Internet, perhaps. But if you have a city, right? If you have a whole entire city, right, you need to think about so many more things, right? You need to think about infrastructure. You need to think about economics. You need to think about trade, politics, right? There's a whole host of things you have to think about. As systems get larger and larger, you have to do more and more to maintain the system because it's bigger. So this is where our dilemma comes, right? This is where we run into issues. When it comes to human society, as we develop, right? As we develop, we become more specialized. As we become more specialized, we have less kids. And that's because it takes more time to train the kids. If you work on a farm, having more kids equals more labor. But if you work in IT, having more kids means you have to take care of them until they can become a productive worker, right? That takes longer. It takes more effort and time, and it takes more emotional energy. So it's as natural as, I would say, gravity. So now here's my kind of like model for how demographics populations work. So if we have like a city, let's say city A and city B, over time, there's a tendency for people to go to concentrate in bigger and bigger and bigger cities. It's almost like gravity. The bigger the city gets, the more people are drawn to it because of opportunities, because of efficiencies. This all has to do with efficiencies. Efficiency. And then it gets bigger and bigger and bigger. But at some point, there comes a there's a counteracting force to this, which I as I mentioned is the decline in birth rates, but also it's related to human autonomy, right? Because we have a need for uh, autonomy as well. We have a need for autonomy as well. So if it gets too big, if the city gets too dense, too big, it starts dissipating, right? People start leaving the city because it's too. People want more space, right? People want more autonomy. So just like, for example, with the sun, with any star, really, there's gravity that's trying to pull it in, and then there's the fusion energy, right? Fusion energy, which is radiating out. So they balance each other, right? They're counteracting forces. Fusion, negative fusion plus gravity. And basically, cities have the exact same. You can model cities exactly the same way. So, what does this have to do with population dynamics? As as we develop as a society, things become more and more efficient, and we see that hockey-like stick of growth, right? Because things are more efficient. But then, as the efficiency gains start dwindling, we start reaching the zenith, right? The peak of our population. And then we don't know what will happen next. In ecological cycles, it goes like this, right? In ecology, it's not an exact sine wave, obviously, but you have a predator prey cycle, kind of. It could flatline totally if we do like artificial population controls. It could flatline. It could collapse, right? We've seen that before, over and over, right? This is the end of civilization as we know it. And we've seen that time and time again, right? Roman Empire, Mount Maya, Aztecs, the old Chinese empires. Some of them rebound, some of them go back, but British Empire, some of them are still here, right? But they're just declining. So the question is basically, where are we at, right? Where are we at? It's a question mark. And then how does this population dynamic actually work, right? What's the model? I don't have the specific model right now. I can try coming up with, I'll do a little bit of like simulation experiments, kind of like the dark matter simulations, something similar to it, um, to see what could actually happen. There's a limit to how much we can model based on mathematics. And then with this whole thing, the final part really is what does this mean for me, right? What does this mean for me, for you, for all of us? I can't predict the future with AI, quantum computing, nanotechnology, longevity medicine. There's so many variables. It's hard to predict what can happen. But I will put up a little bit of a mm, maybe an insight as to what may happen. The whole reason this is kind of the whole human experiment has been thus far to specialize more and more, right? Efficiency, more efficiency leads to more development, which leads to more specialization, which leads to less kids, which leads to less autonomy. But then there's a counteracting force with autonomy, because we want it's a natural human inclination to want more autonomy. But where does this lead us? What the human experiment really has been is, so we took nature, right? Nature is like this, it's a whole, I'm just symbolizing it as a circle. Just to give you like an analogy. So if nature is a whole, what humanity has done is we've kind of carved it up, right? We've taken like chunks of nature, and it's kind of like making a cookie. You know, we've taken chunks of nature, right? And not really taken it, but we've like reassembled it, right? So we've taken chunks of nature and we've reassembled it. So nature is already whole, right? It's whole from the very beginning. There's nothing, it's totally congruent within itself, right? It's totally integrated, right? But now we kind of take parts of nature and we take pieces, chunks of nature, and we kind of rearrange them in such a way to like almost create a Frankenstein, like a collage, a mess of things, in a beautiful way, but a mess of things. And so this is why in nature, big systems actually, right? In nature, bigger systems are more resilient. But in human systems, bigger systems are less resilient. And that's because it's not integrated. So like I mentioned with the gears, right? If we have gears, the more pieces we have, right, the more points of failure there are. Let's say each gear has a 90% chance of failing. Or sorry, 10% chance of failing, right? So in total, this would have a 19% chance. 90 minus 90 times. Yeah, this would have a 19% chance of failing. But if we only had one gear, it would have a 10% chance of failing, right? Every additional gear would increase the odds of failure, right? Because there are more points of failure with every additional gear, But that's because we look at each individual part as a component, right? Because we chunk things in. It's exactly like this diagram, right? We take an already integrated nature and we cut it into pieces, right? Because we're looking at it in terms of pieces, more complex systems become less resilient. They're more prone to failure. We can see that with the supply chain, right? The global supply chain, any tiny blip, any tiny disruption creates huge, massive disturbances in the global economy. But with nature, bigger systems are more resilient, right? Because they're what would be a good analogy? It's like a fish tank versus a pond. A small fish tank, it's much more, it's easier to mess it up, right? Because you have to take into account pH, temperature, oxygen, O2 levels, light, etc., right? Etc., etc. But if you have like a lake, right? If you have a huge lake, it's much more resilient. And that's because things are more dispersed, right? They're more dispersed. It's not as concentrated, right? Which makes it easier to manage. So what does so what does this have to do with, how does this relate to my life, right? Basically what we've done as humans, we've developed very complex, right? Humanity. Complex systems. We've developed complex systems which are very efficient, but they are very fragile. Very fragile. So now the real question is, how do we reintegrate these systems? One way you can think about it is in terms of cyclical, the life cycle of not just products, but society, civilization, countries, nations, lives. There's only three components, right? The start, the maintenance, and the end. Growth, the economy has only been focused on growth, right? Only on growth, only on growth, only on growth. But, well, that's a little bit of a straw man. There has been talks about saving, maintenance, but not as much, right? It's rarely talked about. But really, there's only three components, right? Creation, maintaining, and destruction, right? Recycling, reusing, reducing, rotting, all these things, creation, maintaining, and destruction. Why are human systems so fragile? It's because we only focus on these individual components. We only focus on each specific gear, but we don't focus on how it all fits together in the big scheme of things. If we look at, okay, so what would be a solution, right? What would be a solution to cities, to housing, to population, to occupation, to meaning? That's very simple, right? Looking at where we came from. Our meaning comes from each other. Meaning, you. My meaning is you. And me. Your meaning is me. We are each other's meaning. Well, said another way, I am I's meaning, because there's no separateness. So there's only really there's really only meaning and what we do as humans that matters. Meaning is it comes from our hearts, right? It comes from our connection with people. And then what we do as humans is we observe the universe. We are the universe observing itself. Right? So what are we supposed to do? We're really just supposed to experience life. That's the best thing we can do. It's experiencing life and having meaning. It's each other, having each other as our meaning. I try to live by it every day. Sometimes some days are better than others, for sure. Sometimes I'm tired, sometimes I'm stressed out, sometimes I'm hungry, hangry. But all this, right? This whole works, right? The all of this, all of it, all of it, all of it is really living our lives. Well, the best thing you can really do is to live your life, to connect with people, connect with nature. Everything else will take care of itself because we can try to model, right? We can try to predict, model, which is that's another human thing we do, right? Predictions, modeling, models. But at the end of the day, it'll all work itself out, right? It'll all work itself out because we're part of nature. Not just part, we are nature. And we're perfect just the way we are. You're perfect just the way you are.